So, little recap of where we're at in the book here. We're going to be talking tonight about doubt. And in doubt, we're going to be talking about doubting Thomas, we like to call him. But before we get to that point, we kind of need to understand where we're at in the history of the Bible here. So prior to this event, the disciples have been with Jesus. They've gone through the communion with him, and to the point where they've gone out into the garden. And in the garden here is where we're about to see Jesus be betrayed. So Judas comes to him, he gives him a kiss. This alerts the guards there that this is the one that calls himself the Son of God. So here, Judas comes up, gives him on a kiss, and if you like violence and you like gory movies, you got it right here, because Peter comes up and he cuts off the guard's ear. And Jesus, in this miraculous way, picks it up, decides to go, sticks it back on him, and says, "Ah!" And the ear goes back together. And he looks at Peter and he's like, "No, that's not what we came here for." And at this point, there's fear that gets placed into the disciples, and they flee. So most people don't realize, they think that Jesus, the disciples are there with Jesus throughout most of the story. But in fact, Jesus goes out pretty much by himself and is arrested. He goes through all these trials, goes through the beatings, goes through all the crucifixion and so forth alone, because the disciples here have become afraid and now they fled. But you can imagine at this point, right? You can imagine being one of the disciples who's devoted your last 3 years of your life, right? You devoted your life to this man that you call Jesus. You call literally, God is with us. Imagine the fear that's going through your mind. Imagine the anxiety. Imagine the doubt. The doubt that you spent 3 years with this man, and is it really true? Is it true that he was the Messiah that you thought it was, that you thought he was? So he's dead. Now Jesus has been crucified. He's on the cross. He's been placed inside of a tomb. So his physical body, his blood, flesh, bone, all of that has been placed inside a tomb. And now we start getting into the story here. So on the third day, after he'd been placed in a tomb, a few of the female followers of Jesus, they go in and they're headed to the tomb to anoint him with oil, bring spices, and so forth. But when they get there, they notice that this large stone has been rolled away from in front of the tomb. At this point, I mean, if you're like me, I would be sitting here kind of freaked out, right? Freaked out because here's a stone. If you imagine, like, that screen right there is the entrance to the tomb, and now all of a sudden you've got a large boulder that covers the entirety of that. So it's not like someone can just go in there and roll it away with a little heave and a hoe. I mean, you've got to have some oomph behind, and you've probably got to have what? Got to have a bunch of people. I mean, this cat right here, he's pretty big. He knows that you got to have a couple of different people to go with it. So when they get there, though, they're amazed not to find anybody. But when they walk inside, they see an angel, and this angel says, "Hey, the person that you're looking for, Jesus, as you call him, he's not here. But I want you to go tell the disciples that he's risen." And the ladies are pretty much, they're kind of freaked out at this point, right? They're afraid. So afraid at this point that instead of going and telling the other disciples like they were told to do, that Jesus has risen, they just keep their mouth shut and they don't go tell them. So afraid that they now doubt themselves in this moment. So the next person, Jesus, I'm sure, is looking down upon them, and he's like, "Come on, guys, like, seriously, why don't you go tell them that I'm still alive?" But instead, Jesus says, "Well, I'm going to make another appearance." So he comes to Mary Magdalene, and he shows up for her, and immediately when he shows up for her, she is like stunned. It's Jesus. She's so excited that she can't keep it to herself, that she runs to the disciples and she tells them, "I've seen the risen Jesus. What he told us he would do, he is here. He's alive. He told us that he would be alive, and it's actually happening." But the disciples, being the numbskull, stubborn men that they are, doubt Mary Magdalene. So, what happens next? So the next time Jesus appears to two of the disciples. So now he appears to two disciples. They're all like headspace, mind blown. They go out and they run to Jesus, or run to the other disciples like, "Hey, you can't believe it. Mary Magdalene was right. Jesus has risen." And what do? They doubt again. So now we're doubting like 3 times. We got 3 times the doubt. So Jesus decides at this point, he's like, you know what, this isn't working. I've got to show it to the disciples. So now we pick up the story, and Jesus comes in front of all the disciples, and he shows himself, except Thomas. Thomas is the one that is not there with him. So let's pick up here in John chapter 20, verse 24 through 29. So follow along with me if you don't mind. Now Thomas, one of the 12 called the twin, was not with them, was not with Jesus, or when Jesus came the first time. So the other disciples then told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see his hands and the nail marks, and literally place my fingers inside these marks, and place my hand into his side, I will not believe." 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands, and put your hand and place it into my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord, my God." Jesus said to him then, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." So what I really love about this is that Jesus comes to Thomas, and he doesn't wait for Thomas to say, "Let me see your hands, and let me see your wrist, let me see your sides." Jesus knew exactly what Thomas needed in that moment, and Jesus gives it to Thomas, even to the point, though, that Jesus knew Thomas even better than himself. Because if we look at the passage there, at no point does Thomas say, "Hey, let me put my fingers inside your hands," or "Let me stick my hand around you to the side." No, Jesus just says, "Hey, look, take a look, dude." And Thomas, I can imagine, falls at his feet and says, "My Lord, my God." And at that point, they've all, the disciples, all the women that were with him, all these people have now seen the risen Lord. And I imagine at this point, they just fall at their feet and they start worshiping him. Because at this point, they see that Jesus is alive, literally alive. That Jesus that said he would be alive, that is alive today, just as he much is forever. So you would think at this point, though, that Thomas's doubt, that it would disqualify him. That Jesus would have said, "Hey, you've missed it 4 times. That because you've missed it 4 times, I'm going to kick you out of being one of the disciples." But no, Jesus says, "No. I knew that you needed this. I knew that you needed to see me." And it didn't just disqualify him. It didn't disqualify him. Instead, it was Jesus who kept pursuing after him. The thing is about that too, it doesn't disqualify us. In fact, doubt is something that all of us we all have in common. You may not want to admit it, but it is something that kind of binds us together. So even though Thomas verbally said, "I need to see his hands and feet, I need to stick my fingers literally inside him or around his side," the other disciples, I believe, actually had the same doubt. Because if we go back a little bit into the passages, it's actually when Jesus shows himself to the other 10 disciples before Thomas was with them, the first thing Jesus says is, "Peace be with you," and the second thing he does is he shows them his hands and his side. So when we think Thomas is the doubter here, we have to look at all of them and say we all have something in common, right? They all had something in common. They all doubted in the same way. And Jesus knew exactly what they all needed. The same doubt that Thomas was facing, the same burden, the same thing that plagued him was the same thing that plagued all of them. And the same thing can be true for us too, because if we don't talk about our doubt, then it's something that we think is just our own, right? We think it's the same thing. We think that, hey, I'm the only one that wonders why there's so much evidence of UFOs out there. Like, God, please explain this. Like, Lord, help me, please, because I've missed the mark on this one. Like, I'm the only one that thinks that. I mean, just tonight, like, I literally am sitting in the car driving here, and I doubt, should I even be coming here, because I wonder, am I a good enough parent to my children to think that I'm worthy enough to come and talk to y'all? And the enemy likes to feed those doubts more and more with us. And in that, some of you probably have the same doubt. There's probably sin in your lives that you've done outside the building that makes you wonder, should I even come into the building tonight? That doubt is what keeps us from really receiving all that Jesus has in store for us. If there's two things that you take away from tonight more than anything, just think of this. That doubt is a normal thing. We all encounter it. And doubt does not disqualify you, nor does it stop you from receiving Jesus and all the grace that comes with it. So 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfect in weakness. Right? His power, Jesus' power, is perfect in our doubt. Those areas that we are weak, those areas of doubt, those are areas that Jesus makes his presence known. That becomes a strength in him. Like for me, I have a couple. I just told you a little bit of a story of doubt. One thing, when I was your age, I was a part of a youth group that was 200 people strong. We had 200 people there every single week, to the point where we had a 7th and 8th grade service that had 200 people, and then we had a 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade that had 200 people. A massive youth group. And I was a part of that, and I was one of the leaders as a 7th and 8th grader. I was part of the youth, the band there, and everything. And then my family up and moved to a town called Decatur, Texas, which was a lot smaller. So I got uprooted from the support system that I had and placed into a place where I didn't know anybody. I wasn't involved with the church. My parents weren't involved in asking me, and hey, you should go to church on Wednesday night. You should go, you should go, you should go. Instead, I got involved with a wrong group of people, and doubt started creeping in. I started questioning a lot of things. And honestly, I think questioning and going through those phases is a good thing. But it's a good thing to the point to say, why do I believe what I believe? But at the same time, if we let it take root and overcome even our faith at that point, it can start to overcome even the strongest of our faith. And that's what it did to me. I mean, where I still believed and I still didn't lose my faith, but it was something that, even though I didn't lose my faith, I got wrested into things that I wouldn't have done before, like premarital sex or alcoholism. I wasn't alcoholic, but alcohol, and even to the point of like trying marijuana and things like that. All of those things, I do not believe I would have done had I stayed still in the larger youth group or that youth group that I was vested in. Doesn't matter how large or how small, that's that youth group. And then going to a place where I wasn't encouraged and wasn't invested in them. That to say, God still helped me understand and bring doubt into the question and understand why I believe what I believe. The second was the time that I joined the Army. It was one of those things where I didn't have to join the Army. I was on the verge of graduating my associate degree, and I decided, you know what, I could go to broadcast journalism school in the Army. And instead of doing that, they were like, you should go to language school. And I was like, righto. And to the point of I was going to put my life on hold to go into the Army, except there was one drawback. The drawback was they didn't want me to ship out until January. Well, at this point, it's like June, July, and I was like, well, if I have to ship out then, I'll just start school in August. So I'm praying about it and said, Lord, if it's your will, I'll start school. Like, I'll go to your school here, and then I'll push the Army away. Or if you want me to go into the Army, you'll move up my ship time. Well, sure enough, in August, I get a call that says, hey, you can ship out in September if you want to. And I'm like, yes, all right, Lord, I hear you. This is what we're doing. And then 5 weeks later in there, I had a freak accident where I re-broke the same ankle that I had 2 screws in. So here I am, going to the hospital there. They take x-rays. I start seeing one of the medics there, one of the doctors, and they're like, hey, man, with your file, you're not even supposed to be here. So here I am thinking, God, you placed me into this. You brought me here. And now within 5 weeks, where are you? I questioned a lot of that. And then it took another 4 weeks to me to get processed out. And that's a whole nother long story about the U.S. government just dragging their feet. And so the point of that is I had 2 instances in my life where I questioned, God, what are you truly trying to do here? What are you trying, where are you? Especially in the Army. But I will say this, when I got out of the Army, it's one of those instances in my life that I look back and go, I learned more about myself in that. Because every single night that I was laid up questioning God, I was still going into my Bible and I was reading. I had other people that I was sitting there praying with and so forth. And we were going through it together because I had brought those doubts out in the open to other people. See, our doubts, they can be good. They can be good in a sense of because we all have them, and it's a way that Jesus calls us nearer to him. But then at the same time, they can be very, very dangerous. See, I look at doubt and faith as like seeds. And if I were to take a seed and a bunch of flowers and I plant them into a garden, I tend them, right? I go out and I tend them, I water them, I give them the best fertilizer that they have. And as they sprout, I then go out there daily and I start looking and viewing this beautiful garden that's in front of me. And I get to marvel in it. But the moment that I wait a couple of days and I just pass by it, I get in a hurry, there's a little seed that starts popping up, and that's a weed of doubt. And then doubt pops up, and I miss it. A few more days goes by, a week goes by, and before I know it, all these weeds have now taken over my garden. They've taken over the flowers. They've overcome that. So this beautiful thing that I had once seen has now been overcome by these weeds. But all it took was for me to literally pay attention long enough to see that first weed that popped up and start picking it so that others could not come in. It's like doubt's the same way. If we let that doubt come in, then ultimately it's like a weed that can take over our faith. I mean, I just gave the story of my life, right? I gave the story of how when I was in high school, how I let the weeds of doubt take over. And I knew that premarital sex was bad. I knew that drinking alcohol and smoking weed, I knew those things were not the things that I wanted to do. I knew that they weren't holy. I knew that they weren't godly, but it was something that I decided that it didn't matter. It didn't matter to me. Sorry guys, there's notebooks. You have notes too at school, don't you? Yeah. So God wants us to express our doubts to him, right? He wants us to pray to him and tell him what our doubts are. It's like that pruning of the weed. But we also need to bring our questions and our doubts to those who can help us understand them. Because again, if we hold it down and we don't have someone that can, like, okay, UFO story is probably a bad one, but I can ask God, like, where are you in this moment in my life? And if I'm bringing that to, let's say, Jared, I'm like, Jared, I'm going through this struggle. There's a doubt that I'm doubting, like, where is God in this? Jared is someone that can sit there and help me understand maybe what is God trying to teach me in this moment. And that's always something important to remember, is when we're going through phases of hardship in our lives, is to take a moment and step back and say, Lord, what are you trying to teach me here? But a youth pastor is a great person to bring that to, a small group leader, a trusted friend, a parent, someone that you can bring that doubt out into the open. When we engage others with our doubts, they begin to lessen. The power of these doubts begin to lessen. It's like when Thomas expressed his doubts to the other disciples, they could take on that burden with him. The other disciples didn't have to come out and say what theirs were because, hey, they're like, hey, Thomas has the same doubts. We're all good in that. But the same thing can be true with y'all. Like, I don't know what some of your doubts are, but you know what your doubts are. And I guarantee you that there's others in this room that are sitting there at times where I've said, maybe the other atheists at school, maybe they have something, maybe they're right on this. Like, that is a doubt that starts to creep in that can really take a foothold and steer us down a big, long path of destruction. But I tell you again, you're not alone in this. Like, your doubt does not disqualify you. And one thing that I learned when I was going through a recent phase of doubt, like, there was something that I have a guy that I watch and I listen to. He's a Christian pastor, professor, writer. And I was listening to something that he said, and it threw me into a loop because he was talking about his own personal doubt. And I'm thinking, like, man, if this cat, if he has doubt, then odds are that I'm not alone in this. But one thing he said that is if you're writing notes, write this one down, is that when you have doubt start to creep in, go to the areas of faith that are the strongest. So saying, like, man, I'm doubting, like, what's going, Lord, how can, I don't quite understand creation stories sometimes. I believe in you and I believe this, but then God says, well, look at all these other things that I've done in life. Look at these other places that I've fulfilled my promises in you. Like, that's an area that I can go and grasp onto to not keep feeding that doubt or let it take over. The same is true, but same thing at that, you still have to take that doubt and you need to bring it to a pastor. You need to bring it to someone that can help you get through it. Again, doubt does not disqualify you. I want you to understand that doubt is not something that disqualifies you from Jesus. If it was, again, Thomas would have been super disqualified right off the bat, right? I would have been disqualified. Jared would have been disqualified. All the pastors here, every person in this world would have been disqualified from entering the kingdom of heaven. But each one of us has some kind of doubt at some point in time. You're not alone in that. But admitting your doubt to Jesus and to others is what really frees us from that burden of carrying that weight of that doubt. And we don't want to admit it, right? We don't want to admit that we have doubt because it makes us feel like our faith is imperfect. Like Jared, it makes me feel like there's something wrong with me when I say, man, I doubt being up here. I don't want to admit that I felt like unworthy coming up here. But the truth is that there's probably something that Jared had come up today or last Wednesday or another Wednesday before that made him feel the same way. And when we can communicate this, that means that together that we can come together and actually sit there and go, okay, why am I feeling this way? What is it that I need to maybe do in my own personal life, or in that raise my hand and say, I'm never going to be worthy enough. I am never going to be worthy enough, but I'm blessed that I get to sit here with y'all. Sit here and talk with y'all. We let the weeds of doubt grow, and when they do, they begin to take us out of the beautiful life that Jesus has in store for us. In the last verse there, in verse 29, I'm remiss if we don't speak to it. Jesus tells Thomas, after he's shown him his hand, and Thomas has fallen on his knees in front of us, he says, because you have seen me, have you believed? It's a question of Thomas. I'm sure Thomas at this point is thinking, yeah, I believe. But the gut punch to Thomas and the rest of the disciples after that is the words that Jesus says, blessed are they who did not see and yet believe. And all of these people got to walk with Jesus. They got to hear the parables. They got to hear him speak. They got to literally watch him do life and do life with them. To take on the biography of Jesus and the things that they said, hey, that what we should be doing in our life, they got to literally live that with him. And yet Jesus says, blessed are those who believe and did not see. And that's us. There's so much beauty. There's so much grace in that. And yet I guarantee you that there are people in this room right now that have doubt, so much doubt, that they don't believe that they're worthy or are disqualified from entering into a relationship with Jesus. Like you want to believe in Jesus. You want to, but you're scared of those doubts. Like God knows every hair on our head. He knows every good deed, every bad deed that we've done. He knows exactly what you're thinking right now. He knows He knows the doubts you have. And just like Thomas, he keeps showing up for you. For you that don't believe, he's still showing up for you. And for you that do, man, it's awesome that he keeps showing up for us and keeps giving us mercy and grace day after day. So yeah, doubt's hard, and it's something that we face so often. You're not disqualified. In fact, you are loved, and his grace is enough for all of us. Y'all pray with me? Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you for this time that we get to come together, God. I thank you for the worship music, the blasting of that, Lord, just getting to shout out, Lord, that the Lion of Judah roars, and we get to roar with you, Lord. Lord, I thank you for each and every one of these young people that are here, these friends that are here with us, Lord, these brothers and sisters in Christ, God. Lord, I pray that your words, Lord, they pierce where they need to be piercing. They challenge where they need to be challenging, Lord. But Lord, to know that your love and grace covers all. But Lord, I pray that if there's anyone in here that's struggling with any kind of doubt, even if it sounds silly, Lord, that they come to one of us, one of the leaders, one of the pastors, before they leave tonight, and they just ask a question. If there's any questioning that they have or any answers that they need answered, Lord, I pray that they just bring it to us, Lord. As they start meeting in the small groups here in England, Lord, I pray that you just bring great discussion, Lord, conversations that, Lord, help uplift them. God, I just thank you for each and every one of the blessings that they are. Thank you for letting them be here tonight, God. We ask for your protection as they go home, whether it's with their parents driving up, with a friend's parent, or themselves, Lord. It's in your Son's heavenly name we pray. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.